the 2x1 with a triangle airlock. Quickly thrown down anywhere, this popular design serves as starter base and forward operating base alike. It's the perfect choice if you don't want to draw attention or don't want to commit to an area but have fun PvPing. But what if you succeed? You get rich and made a lot of enemies in the process. Meet the Concord, a standard 2x1 turned into a multi-TC mini fortress with inner and outer peekdowns for online raid defense. It is based upon this variation of the footprint of the Alamo base, where two external TCs upkeep the bulk of the battlements. It is thus compatible with any honeycombed 2x1 at the core. It uses the simplest multi-TC design, making it as painless as possible to set up, and there is no visible gap to exploit, neither on the roof nor at the outer walls. Another striking advantage of that design is that when starting out, there's no need to commit to building a full base. Just drop down a 2x1 wherever you might want to build. Depending on how the area develops, turn it into a simple honeycomb 2x1 main base, add a compound, complete the battlements, or just leave the 2x1 as an outpost and start over elsewhere. And while I've been trying to avoid any exploit that might get patched with the next update, I'll be introducing one optional, never seen before exploit by Alpha Fox. It allows you to hide your explosives from raiders during online and offline raids. Costing only about 1/3 of the daily upkeep of the Alamo, this base is ideal for active duos and trios, or even a solo if you settle in the right area. At the same time, the core is protected by 3 layers of walls. That may not sound like much, but that's equivalent to a typical honeycomb 5x5. The minimum raid path to TC is 25 rockets, excluding the compound, and assuming that raiders hit exactly the one right spot. With that earlier mentioned exploit in place, a full raid of the most important loot will cost 40 plus rockets. To take over the base, raiders need to bring another 16 for a total of 56. And that ignores the compound, the traps, and your fearless resistance in case of an online raid. Before we jump into the tour, I want to say thank you to all the people who gave feedback on the early drafts, in particular Lord Desert. You may also be delighted to hear that thanks to Builder Sanctuary's new base sharing feature, you can check out the base without having to build it yourself. The code is ALQBRJ. On to the tour. For the airlock, I ended up using the same integrated design as in the Alamo. The entrance is strengthened by a garage door to discourage raiders from raiding into the airlock and using it as cover. An optional auto turret is guarding the compound against grubbers. The external TCs are integrated into the airlocks. This was a conscious decision to minimize the upkeep. A line of wall frames carries the building privilege towards the main base. This prevents raiders from disconnecting the external TCs with jackhammers. I have minimized the external peekdowns to save cost. The sheet metal wall frames are stabilizing them even if the walls collapse. The windows that are leading directly into the inner peekdowns are reinforced. Unless raiders deliberately target the shooting floor, it is likely to stay intact, giving you more time to fight back. Where the base parts meet, the gaps are covered by wall frames. The airlock leads into the space below the peekdowns. It offers plenty of drop-off chests to quickly store the loot from your successful plays. An auto turret behind this double door covers a wide range of the peekdowns, lending you a hand when raiders enter the breach. This corner is used for an oil refinery to meet the needs of meds and your vehicle fleet. This door leads into the core of the base. The jump up takes us to the second floor. Here we find utility items. Behind the door there's another loot room and a bedroom. This garage door takes us into the core. By leading the door path via the second floor, we can add a sufficient number of doors so that the door raid path is not cheaper than going through walls. The drop-down, guarded by 2 undrainable shotgun traps and a turret, is designed to significantly slow down raiders. In the case of an online raid, this can create a window of opportunity to fight back. The core is basically storage, electronics, and your tier 3 workbench. The TC is in the safest corner of the base. Now let's head back upstairs. Above the entrance there's a jump up that takes us to the 3rd floor. This garage door leads into another utility area with bed, boxes and a locker. Spawn here in the case of an online raid. Separating loot in this fashion is intended to make the full raid more costly. And this is the optional exploit which I call the Panic Room. It uses Alpha Fox's discovery of a vanishing loot exploit. If this locker gets destroyed, its loot stash vanishes. It travels through the wall and lands inside of this triangle where it is surrounded by armored walls. The sleeping bag and drop boxes allow you to retrieve the loot once the raid is over. These doors lead into the inner Peekdowns. The outer ones are double doors to allow you to close them from the inside of the core. The inner Peekdowns are simple but effective. Siren lights prevent you from falling through the cracks and raiders from climbing up easily. This door leads down into the space below the Peekdowns. This can be useful to quickly patch a wall or retrieve a gear set of a downed raider. The outer peaks are covered by doors. Being able to close that door can be useful should the outer peaks become compromised. This square is sectioned off. Here we find one of 2 spawn points of the Peekdowns. This forces raiders to take over more spots if they want to win an online raid. Back in the core, we find a chute that leads onto the roof. Here I'm using the roof access for a Minicopter Hangar. On the roof itself, the floor tiles are placed in a way that no gaps allow to see or shoot into the base. The outer perimeter is shielded by roof ramps. Thanks to the clever placement, we retain those cracks to shoot through despite the recent update. 2 auto turrets are guarding the roof. They are positioned to cover all the space inside of the roof ramps and counter top-down raids. That's it for the tour, onto the build. When you put down your 2x1, ensure that there's plenty of space behind the short ends. You will need that for the external TCs. Best verify that the footprint fits before committing to an area. To that end, surround the 2x1 with triangles, and add 1 square to each of those sides. This is the footprint of the core. Against the triangle tip on each side place a triangle, 2 squares to the left, 9 squares out, 2 squares towards the center, 6 triangles back, a square and a triangle. Upgrade the last triangle. This is where the external TCs and the compound airlocks will be. Remember that all of this testing is optional. In particular, if the surrounding terrain is flat, you can just risk it and chuck down the 2x1. If you're content with the chosen location, secure the build site. Pick one of the squares and turn it into a 1x1 with a double door. Use it for your starter items. Demolish these triangles, otherwise you won't be able to place the external TCs. Head out to those upgraded triangles, create a TC compartment and secure it with a window. Since at this point you're unlikely to have reinforced glass, add a second triangle. Use it to either protect the TC with a temporary wooden door, to later replace it with a window, or use a double door and later replace it with a garage door. Since now you have building privilege, let's remove all the excess twig with the demolish function of your hammer. You don't want to give away what you're building. Next, we're going to extend the base into a 2x1 with a triangle airlock. The typical 2x1 would use single doors for the airlock. In this case, only do this if you're either confident that you will obtain armored doors, or if you're willing to soft side pick them out later on. Here, we will be using double doors instead, so we can later replace them with the more easily accessible garage doors. Before you close off the ceiling above the airlock, there is one thing you need to remember. Lord Desert reminded me about one little oddity of those triangle floor tiles. Currently, they can get damaged through walls unless they're attached to that wall with their base. You recognize the base from its pattern. It's the side that looks different than the other two. To ensure that the base of a floor tile connects to a specific wall, point as closely at the wall as you can when placing that floor tile. We apply this lesson here to the airlock. Attach the ceiling against the outer wall. Please continue to watch out for that throughout the rest of the build. Next, let's turn the 2x1 into a proper starter unit. Clear out the TC room. Move furnaces, sleeping bags and a workbench into that second square. Head outside to the side opposite of the airlock. Place an upgraded foundation and a floor tile at half height. If no object or player inside of the TC room is in the way, you can now place a triangle floor tile through the wall. This will create a makeshift shelf for boxes and turn the TC room into your main loot room. You have now secured the build site and created a starter base out of which you can continue to operate. This concludes phase 1 of the build. In the second phase of the build, we will turn the starter unit into a small main base. Extend the core footprint into a 2x1 surrounded by triangles on all sides. I will assume that eventually you obtain garage doors, so I will replace the double doors with them already. In game, if necessary, use double doors first and replace them bit by bit as gears and metal fragments are coming in. Optionally, if for the time being you want to have a single door airlock, add 2 wooden doors in front of the outer door. Remember to attach the base of the floor tile to the outer wall. Above the last garage door, build a chute. A furnace or a ladder will allow you to get onto the second floor. If you have trouble with these jumps, press F1 to open your console and type auto crouch true. Now go to the opposite side. Honeycomb the bit around the floating half wall. Attach the floor tile to the outer wall. On the 2 triangles next to it, build a 2-door airlock. This will be your main entrance. Single doors are best if you have or will have armored doors. If that's unlikely, we will combine a double door with a garage door. Behind the second door, use a furnace or ladder as jump up. Build a chute above it, but leave the ceiling off. Close off the ceiling above the outer door. Honeycomb the 2 short sides of the 2x1. Upgrade the ceiling above the core to sheet metal. Head back inside and replace the tier 1 workbench with a tier 2. Protect the chute with 2 shotgun traps, one behind the first, one behind the second door. You're now protected from an 8 rocket raid. Surround the whole outer perimeter of the second floor with walls. Add 2 additional garage doors around that square. The rear part can now be used for more items. Upgrade all floor tiles to sheet metal before you place anything onto them. The triangle next to the jump up can hold 3 furnaces. In front of it, place the research table. I would use those single triangles for lockers. Those double triangles are ideal for another loot room with boxes and a repair bench. Create a shelf with floor tiles. Note that little trick I used to attach the base of those floor tiles to the outer walls. Upgrade them to sheet metal. Use the square for a mixing table and up to 3 sleeping bags for a second spawn point. Now close off the ceiling. Only above this triangle, add a roof exit. Cover that exit with a shotgun trap. Since you now have a proper exit, you can soft side out those temporary wooden doors on the first floor. 3 machetes will destroy the door frame in no time if you're hitting its weak side. This corner can be used for another loot room with 2 vending machines for extra storage. Make sure you turn off broadcasting. If possible, use a ladder hatch or at least a ladder to get onto the second floor. You now live out of a decently secured main base. This concludes the second phase of the build. In the third phase of the build, we will add a compound. This prevents cheap griefing and allows you to deploy large furnaces to significantly speed up the rest of the build. First, let's make sure those external TCs protect the main base from griefing. If you haven't done so already, make sure that the TCs are protected by 2 windows. In the compartment in front of the TC, you can place up to 3 small boxes on the ground. In one of them, keep something to break a TC, such as a bow with flame arrows or a shotgun with at least 23 handmade shells. To make those TC compartments more secure, upgrade the walls of the inner triangle to sheet metal. Armor the ceiling of the TC compartment and honeycomb the outer side. Against the other side, place a square. And then start building towards the base. 1 square followed by 9 triangles. Upgrade those triangles as shown and remove the remaining ones. Then place wall frames onto them towards the base. And skip the last triangle. This prevents the use of tools to disconnect the external TC. Thanks to this arm, the building privilege of the external TC now extends over the main base. This means if your main base gets raided, raiders cannot place their own TC and take over your main base. However, the same applies to you. If you want to recover your main base, follow these steps. Take the ammo out of all shotgun traps. Craft 3 TCs. Have a teammate with a TC ready in the main base. Head out to the external TCs and use the weapons you deployed there to destroy the tool cupboards. Have your friend replace the main TC. Then quickly replace the external TCs. With only 2 external TCs, this is done quickly and a lot better than to let the base decay. Now let's create the compound. Next to the external TCs, add a second square for the airlock. We use 2 double doors and a garage door and surround the rest with windows. Protect the top of the airlock with barricades. Place 1 drop-off chest behind the first door and add a shotgun trap behind the inner door. For the compound, start by clipping a wall into the left side of the airlock. Then work your way around the base. Once you reach the other airlock, clip the wall into the honeycomb of the external TC. You can now deploy large furnaces. Deploy them in line of sight of those airlock entrances. To prevent raiders from building their raid bases close to your base, place extra TCs outside of the walls. We will use the simple walled-off single triangle design. We'll provide the upkeep immediately so that there is no need to have a window or for accessing it later. A stack of metal fragments will suffice for a 2-week wipe. I would recommend 2 to 3 external TCs per site. If you have spare auto turrets, you can place 1 behind each of the inner doors of the airlock in order to guard your large furnaces. A simple circuit with a solar panel and a battery will suffice to run them. When you are online, leave the double doors open so that the turrets can pick off grubbers who jump into your compound. And if you leave the base unattended for a longer period of time, close the doors to prevent that somebody drains and destroys the turrets cheaply. This concludes the third phase of the build. It now requires serious dedication to drive you out of the area. In the fourth phase of the build, we're going to construct the battlements. We start with the walls surrounding the inner Peekdowns. Add a square foundation to each of the white sides of the core. Build a 2-story wall on the outside. Left and right, place 2 stone wall frames each. Close off the lower ones with double doors. This is also a good time to replace the double door leading into the core. If you have the blueprints, chain link fences can be a good way to section off the upper part. Locate the single triangle coming out from the external TC. Continue with triangle, square, triangle, square, triangle. The tip of the last triangle should point at the corner of the squares we placed earlier. Upgrade the triangles to sheet metal and the squares to stone. Do this on both sides of the triangle tip. On the left side of the triangle tip, place a sheet metal wall frame with a garage door and a sheet metal wall above it. On the right side, place a window and another garage door above it. On top of the 3 triangle foundations in front of them, construct an airlock. Surround the second floor garage door with walls. Then add stone walls, 2 stories high, along the inner perimeter of those foundations. Onto the sides of those triangle foundations that are closer to the airlock, place sheet metal wall frames, 2 stories high. This will later stabilize the outer Peekdowns. On the outer side, place stone wall frames to close the gap. Repeat all those steps on the other side of the base. The space below the Peekdowns now becomes usable for extra items. I would use those gaps between the foundations for large boxes. Fit as many as you can. Those gaps can also hold an oil refinery. To build the Peekdowns, head onto the 3rd floor. Start by placing the outer Peekdowns onto the sheet metal wall frames. You want 2 triangles on the outer and 1 triangle on the inner frame. Only after the outer peaks are placed, add 3 triangles for the inner Peekdowns, and a square above the foundation that extends out from the core. Add siren lights to prevent raiders from climbing through the cracks. Next, we will build the 3rd floor bedroom. Upgrade all floor tiles above the core to sheet metal. Around the 2 triangle tips, place 2 double doors opening inwards and 1 garage door. Surround the rest of the core with walls. Close off the ceiling apart from the triangle across the chute. If you need to deploy additional small furnaces, this triangle can take up to 3 of them. build a roof exit on top of it. Guard it with a shotgun trap. Place 2 garage doors around this square. Turn the double triangles next to the chute into another loot room. Upgrade the wall to sheet metal and turn it around. The double triangles diagonally across will for now be used for a locker and otherwise left empty. Fill the 2x1 space with up to 3 beds. Next, we add the shooting floor. Surround those triangles above the airlock with walls. Embed a half-height floor tile and close it off with a door. Use a shotgun trap to guard that entrance. Deploy ladders to allow climbing down into the space below the Peekdowns. Surround the rest of the outer perimeter of the 3rd floor with windows. Upgrade the window frames above the airlock and above the squares to sheet metal, the rest to stone. Cover the windows with embrasures. Cover the crack of the outer Peekdowns with an open single door. Further, use siren lights to prevent players from squeezing through the cracks. Separate them from the inner Peekdowns with a window and a single door. Deploy small boxes to give you better angles. Surround a single square with wall frames and sheet metal double doors. Then place a locker against the wall and up to 3 sleeping bags to create extra spawn points. Use reinforced glass for the window. Do that on both sides. Head onto the roof to place the remaining ceiling. Attach all floor tiles above the shooting floor to the core. Only the floor tiles above the outer Peekdowns can be attached to the outer parts. Place square roof ramps above the outer walls. Best start by heading into the outer Peekdowns and place the roofs through the ceiling. Add wall frames to stabilize the roof. Now head back to the roof to close off the remaining gaps. Optionally, onto that triangle, place 2 windows with embrasures. If you do this, you might want to cover this gap, for example with a garage door. Fill in the remaining spots with roofs again. Attach all of them to the outer walls. Thanks to being multi-TC, you even retain those nice peaks that used to be a thing. Turn the 2 squares and the 2 triangles next to the roof exit into a Minicopter Hangar. I'd use the window for better situation awareness in case of a raid. Use a garage door for the outer door so that the Minicopter can be parked in this space. This door can be a double door, which can be closed through the garage door. All the building blocks are now in place. This concludes the 3rd phase of the build. Until now, we have channeled most of our metal fragments into deployables. In the next phase, we're going to upgrade the main base to its final state. Inside of the core, upgrade every foundation, wall and ceiling to armored. This includes the outer wall on the second floor above the ladder hatch. This leaves you with a daily upkeep of about 55 HQM, which you can easily cover by 1 or 2 recycle runs. Once you crafted a tier 3 workbench, pick up the tier 2 and the rest of the items here. If you used garage doors, place the tier 3 against the back of the former triangle airlock. Otherwise, I would place a locker into this corner, 2 more large boxes on the floor, and up to 3 additional sleeping bags in the remaining space. Replace the shotgun traps guarding the chute. Head onto the second floor and upgrade the ceilings and all solid walls to sheet metal. Optionally, upgrade the window to the loot room in the half-height triangle. Down in the main entrance, upgrade everything as well. Use a ladder hatch or a ladder for the entrance to the core. Head outside below the peaks. Upgrade all foundations and walls of the first and second floor of the core to sheet metal. Since the space below the inner Peekdowns is separated, you'll need to get to the other side via the Peekdowns or via the outside of the base. Those upgrades leave the core well protected from brute force raids. Finally, get onto the third floor and upgrade the outer wall of the roof exit. You may have wondered why we left those triangles open. They are intended for a hidden panic room that is made possible by a new, never-seen-before vanishing loot exploit that was shown to me by Alpha Fox. Like all exploits, this is likely to get patched. Before relying on it, check the description of the video for any warning that this exploit no longer works. Upgrade the whole rear triangle to armored. Place a campfire and a sleeping bag of the most active team member inside. Leave a couple of drop boxes inside of the campfire. Then close the triangle off with another armored wall. Doing this in armored adds about 16 high qual to the daily upkeep. Now equip a locker and rotate it with the R key so it faces the wrong way. Place it as close as you can to the wall. Then add a code lock. You should be able to reach the lock from the side like this. This locker now can be used to store valuable items, such as high-tier weapons or explosives. If the locker gets destroyed, the loot stash will go through the wall and land inside of that armored panic room with the sleeping bag. Most raiders may simply believe that the locker was empty and move on. If you defeat the raiders or they give up in time, you can respawn inside of the panic room and retrieve the loot from the stash. Use one of the drop boxes to transfer it back out. And even if raiders have seen this video, they now need to decide whether it's worth spending up to 15 rockets to open up that bunker before the loot stash despawns. If you only keep items in the locker that are worth less than 15 rockets, the raiders always lose. And if you decide to use this exploit, you can even turn around the locker in the Peekdowns behind that armored wall. This locker then becomes the perfect candidate for your high-tier defense kits. And if this exploit is patched or you don't want to use it, simply place 3 lockers into that space. This concludes the 4th phase of this build. In the last phase of the build, we're going to add auto turrets. The most urgent need for auto turrets is on the roof. Place 1 auto turrets onto each of the single squares, pointing inwards. Together they cover the whole roof against raiders who try to ladder or land onto the roof. The roof ramps cover them from ground fire. 2 additional great spots are those single triangles below the peaks. The 2 auto turrets can cover the whole area of the inner Peekdowns, which can be tremendously helpful during an online raid. Another interesting spot is in the core. You might need to sacrifice a large box though. This auto turret provides even more protection to the chute. To run those auto turrets, find a place for the battery. I deployed it inside of the roof exit. Here, it is out of the way of any brute force raid path. Another option, however, would be to deploy it in one of the triangles on the second floor. As the power source, I'd use 4 to 5 solar panels distributed across the roof. However, a windmill placed on top of the Minicopter Hangar works equally well. Run your power source directly into the battery. I would deploy the electrical components in the core. We will need a root combiner, a switch, a branch, and 2 splitters. Place a small generator in front of the auto turret. Run that generator as well as the battery into the root combiner. Run the combined output into the switch and from there into the branch. Set the branch to 32 and run its branch out into the first splitter. Run its power out into the second splitter. From the first splitter, feed the 2 auto turrets on the roof . As well as the one inside of the core. From the second splitter, feed the 2 auto turrets in the Peekdowns. Since the second splitter has another free slot, feel free to find a spot for a 6th auto turret. You can, for example, position it above one of the half-height triangles of any of the chutes. Once the auto turrets are in place, the last phase of the build is concluded. If the wipe goes very well and you get filthy rich, you might be looking for more options to upgrade the base. One quick way to increase the strength of the base is to upgrade the ceilings to deter top-down raid attempts. On the roof, upgrade everything to sheet metal. On the second floor, upgrade all accessible floor tiles to armored. This adds about 200 metal frags and 1 high qual to the daily upkeep cost. Another simple improvement is upgrading all the windows and floor tiles of those windowed loot rooms to sheet metal. If raiders blow in through the outer wall, they require additional rockets before they can enter the base. Further, consider upgrading all the walls of the 3rd floor to sheet metal to increase its durability. This should add another 200 frags to the daily upkeep. And finally, there's an option to strengthen the outer walls. Currently, 4 rockets fired at the outer walls are likely to create a 2x2 sized gap. In the video of the clan version of the original Frustrator X, we therefore applied a checker pattern to the outer walls. This way, the gap of a rocket barrage would be a lot smaller and thus easier to patch. Here we're going to use a different approach: stripes. We're going to upgrade the walls above every second foundation. The rationale is that this keeps columns of walls intact, and the shooting floor continues to receive more stability, increasing the probability that it remains intact during a brute force raid. And voila, the Concord. I hope you appreciated the time that I invested in this video. With a baby at home, this was not trivial at all. Please remember that all my designs are platforms. Feel encouraged to adapt them to your preferences and needs. Take care, Evil Wurst out.